Okay, so if you can remember where we left off this week, we were still discussing John Adams. And remember, John Adams is the second president of the United States, and during his presidency, he was experiencing similar problems that George Washington was experiencing as far as foreign affairs goes, because we were kind of getting ganged up upon between the French and the British, both trying to seize our ships and cargo. So this is going to lead into the Alien and Sedition Acts. And just to throw it out there right away, you don't have to write down the quotes, okay? I'm going to kind of explain what each act did, but don't worry about the quotes. So, under John Adams' presidency, Congress will pass two pieces of very controversial legislation. Now, John Adams was a Federalist, and at this time, the Congress was controlled by the Federalist Party, and remember, they're not really against as much like central power and government power as the Democratic Republicans are. So for them, they're in favor of this, but we'll talk about that in a second. So let's actually explain what the acts are first. The Alien Act. The Alien Act allowed the president to deport any dangerous aliens. And first we need to establish that we're not talking about E.T. aliens. An alien is someone who's foreign, someone who is non-American. So the Alien Act allowed the president to deport dangerous aliens. This gives the president a lot of power that wasn't even mentioned in the Constitution. Think about it. He could just deport anyone he seems suspicious. So it gives him a lot of power. The Sedition Act, first of all, it's important to know sedition means treason. And treason is considered crimes against the government. The Sedition Act prohibited speech and publication of any criticism towards the national government. It prohibited speech and publication of any criticism towards the national government. Let's think about this for a quick second. What amendment in the Bill of Rights does this directly violate? It's the First Amendment. Okay, this directly violates the First Amendment, Americans' right to free speech. So obviously, not everyone is going to be very supportive of these two acts, okay? And these two pieces of legislation actually caused a lot of conflict in the United States because a lot of people aren't going to agree with them. And it is kind of divided by political party, whether you were for or against these acts. So I'll kind of explain that. Our first party I'll mention again are the Democratic Republicans, and the Democratic Republicans claimed these acts were unconstitutional, meaning that the federal government shouldn't have these powers. Whereas the Federalists thought these acts were to protect the United States from danger, so they were okay. So because we don't really, the Americans aren't agreeing on this, there's going to be a lot of controversy, and a lot of states are going to talk about this, and a lot of them are going to be against this. So what this leads to are the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. And we know Virginia is one of the original 13 states. Remember, the Americans are now moving westward and expanding west, and so Kentucky is going to be another state okay, that exists at this time. Kentucky and Virginia both declared that the Alien and Sedition Acts were unconstitutional and that they would not have to recognize them in their states as laws. So this becomes a conflict because it's putting into question, do states have to abide by federal laws if they think their federal law is unconstitutional? Well, the answer, according to the Constitution, would be yes, because we know that the Supremacy Clause states the United States Constitution is the supreme law of the land. But right now, that isn't officially carried out. So this is foreshadowing that, we don't know yet that it's the Supreme Court's job to be the part of government that declares a law constitutional or unconstitutional. States at this time are questioning, do we get to decide if something is unconstitutional? But eventually we're going to discuss that that's going to actually be declared in the Supreme Court's jurisdiction. Okay? So just know that the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions are a response to the Alien and Sedition Acts. And they question whether or not states can declare federal laws unconstitutional. Okay, we're now going to move on to our next president, the third president of the United States, and that is going to be Thomas Jefferson, but it isn't an easy decision, and that's what we'll discuss now. Okay, so the election of 1800, there were three candidates running. Thomas Jefferson, who was a Republican, Aaron Burr, who was also a Republican, and John Adams, who's a Federalist, and he was running for re-election. Remember, a lot of people don't like John Adams because he just passed these Alien and Sedition Acts. Well, he didn't pass them by himself, but they were passed under his administration, and we often blame the president if we don't like the way something's going. Okay, now this is kind of backwards, and it's very different from how things run now, but at this point in history, the way you determined a vice president was who gets the second most amount of votes. So you'd have an election for presidency. First place winner becomes president. Second place winner becomes vice president. Yes, that's kind of backwards because technically you could have two different parties in office, as president and vice president, if they were contenders against one another. Okay, so Burr and Jefferson actually receive the same amount of electoral votes. And this means there's a tie. And when there's a tie in a presidential election, the House of Representatives gets to decide who the winner is. Okay, so it goes to the House of Representatives for a vote. And even though we know Alexander Hamilton does not really like Thomas Jefferson because they are on opposite, they're in opposite political parties, Alexander Hamilton despises Aaron Burr even more. If you recall the funny video we watched on Friday when Alexander Hamilton says, "Look, I may be a little androgynous, but the only sissy, I see is Aaron Burr." Okay, that was kind of foreshadowing, but they do not like each other at all. So Hamilton actually campaigns against Aaron Burr in the House of Representatives and convinces them to elect Thomas Jefferson as the president. So that's how Jefferson is actually elected, okay, kind of by campaigning and bribing within the House of Reps. Okay, now let's talk about what happens under Thomas Jefferson's presidency. Westward Expansion. We know we have this new acquired land after the Treaty of Paris, ending the Revolution, that is east of the Mississippi that make up the states today, like Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee. So many planters start expanding into these new territories that had, previously been blocked to them because of the proclamation line of 1763. So they start moving westward, and what we see at this time is kind of agricultural innovation, and just different crops being created, and the explosion of the cotton industry. Okay, so the cotton industry is going to kind of go through a boom in America, in these western parts. Many planters moved west and established cotton plantations. You don't have to know where, but this is done in states that we know very well, like Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama. So southeastern states today, but they were moving west at the time. The reason that there was kind of a cotton boom is that there was an increase in demand for this material in Europe. So there's an increase in demand, so planters were able to get more profit for this crop. And then also we have the invention of the cotton gin. And the cotton gin kind of removes the seeds in the cotton plant a lot faster, so it makes processing cotton much more efficient. And Eli Whitney is the inventor of the cotton gin. Okay, I will explain this in greater depth on Tuesday, but I don't need you to know the whole story for the test. Marbury versus Madison is a very important Supreme Court case, but it's very complex, and I don't really need you to know all the nitty-gritty aspects of it as much as I need you to know the significance of it. So, for now, I just need you to know that this is a Supreme Court case that happens while Thomas Jefferson is the president, and Marbury versus Madison is significant because it established the Supreme Court's right of judicial review. It established the Supreme Court's right of judicial review. And judicial review is when the Supreme Court decides whether or not a law is constitutional. So this is that point when we discussed that the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions were asking, is it a state's job to decide if a law goes against the American government's constitution? No, it's the Supreme Court's job. Okay, so it gives them that official job. Okay, and that's why they can do that today. Alright, because Thomas Jefferson was a Democratic Republican, he did not believe in expanding the power of the federal government. Instead, he wanted to kind of limit it and control it. Okay? So, he does this in a few ways. He reduced taxes. He reduced the size of the standing army in America. And he reduced national spending. So in many ways, he kind of cuts the size of the federal government. He believes that when John Adams was in power, the Federalist Party had expanded it too much, so he kind of wanted to keep it under control. Now, he's about to do something that greatly goes against his ideals of limiting the federal government, But we thank him for this decision that he made, because it is the reason that Louisiana became part of the United States. And of course, I'm talking about the Louisiana Purchase. So let's talk about the background of that, even though I know you learned about this in Louisiana history. So we know Spain was the country that had control over Louisiana, okay? When we ended the revolution, we discussed that. They had at least the majority of Louisiana and what was considered the Louisiana Territory west of the Mississippi. They also controlled New Orleans. When Spain controlled this area, they allowed the Americans to use the port of New Orleans. But the Spanish later sold the Louisiana Territory to France, and the French and Napoleon as their leader, because remember Napoleon's the leader at the time, did not allow the Americans to use the port city. Now think about how important New Orleans is. It is the southern port, that allows boats to travel from the Gulf into American territory and up the Mississippi River, which America did have access to from the east side. Jefferson thought it was very important that the Americans had use to that city and to that port. So he didn't want to fight for it, but he did want to try to pay France, and Napoleon specifically, for that city. He wanted to buy New Orleans from the French so that he had access to it. So Jefferson sent some delegates to negotiate with Napoleon to purchase New Orleans. Now, what Jefferson didn't know is that Napoleon desperately needed money. Okay, he was struggling with war and debt. So when he is greeted by these delegates who offer to purchase New Orleans from him, he turns around and offers a counteroffer, saying he would sell the entire Louisiana Territory for $15 million. And you can see that large piece of land on the map on the screen if it doesn't cut it off. All of that land for $15 million. Now that's a lot of money, but for the amount of land you get, it is approximately 3 cents an acre. Can you imagine today buying land for 3 cents an acre? This was a steal, okay? Now here's the kicker. Nowhere in the Constitution does it give the president the power to buy more land. Okay, nowhere in the Constitution did it justify Thomas Jefferson being able to do this. And he's a strict constructionist. He literally is used to reading the Constitution word for word. That's what he believes in. But this would double the size of his America. He had no choice but to turn his values aside for a quick second and make this purchase. And so he does. He doubles the size of the nation, and he thinks, you know what, I have to do this because this is the good for our for the good of our country. We have to make this happen. So that's how the Louisiana Purchase is acquired. I would like you to be familiar with this year. It's 1803 that he makes this purchase. After this purchase, he sends Lewis and Clark to survey the land and explore the new, now American, territory. Okay, so he sends Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. You don't have to know their first names, but I do enjoy that Lewis's name is Meriwether, so just embrace that for a quick second. Okay, now we're going to get to a very interesting part of American history, duels, okay? And this is also in reference to the video we watched on Friday with the fraternity founding fathers, or the founding fathers fraternity, when Duel and Burr and Hamilton challenge each other to a duel. Okay, let's give the background on this first. New England states feared that with this new territory, they would lose influence and power. Okay, they feared they would lose influence and power. This is just them being a little overly nervous because they had always been the kind of, not main region of the country, but they were the instigators of the rebellion, of the revolution. They had always been very influential in government, and now, in the grander scheme of things, they've become much smaller in comparison to the entire new size of America. So they formed an organization, New England area, formed an organization and openly discussed secession. Secession as in S-E-C-E-S-S-I-O-N, as in breaking away from America. And guess who the leader of this organization was? Aaron Burr. And he was the vice president. So he's the vice president of the United States, and he's plotting openly to rebel, and not even rebel, but to break away from America. Well, Alexander Hamilton finds out about this, and even though Hamilton doesn't always agree with Thomas Jefferson, he's not willing to try to ruin and end America. So he accused Burr of planning to destroy the Union. Burr responds to this by challenging him to a duel, which is basically a shoot-off. This was illegal, but it was very common. So Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel, and Hamilton was killed. Okay, Burr killed and shot and killed Hamilton. So Hamilton dies. And Burr was charged with murder, but he fled west to avoid a trial. And this is just kind of crazy because Hamilton would have, been in line to be a president, potentially. He was very involved in American politics, and he's just shot and killed by the vice president. So this is the kind of crazy stuff that happened at this time in history. At this time, you should pause the screencast, take a quick break, YouTube the Aaron Burr Got Milk commercial. It is one of the original Got Milk commercials that was before your time, but it is entertaining, and it involves this duel. Okay, we'll move on though. Oh, after we get to the funny memes. Duel Aaron Burr, they said. It will be fun, they said. That's, of course, Hamilton. Wasn't too fun for him since he didn't make it. Burned. You can call me Aaron Burr by the way I'm dropping Hamiltons. Yep. Alright, enough of that. Oop, went the wrong way. Okay. The last thing we'll talk about with Thomas Jefferson, the Embargo Act. Okay, you can choose if you want to write down everything on the screen and just fast forward, or you can listen to what I have to say if you'd rather listen to me and learn it by me explaining it, or you can just watch or stop listening and type down what you see on the screen. And if you don't have any questions, then you're good. But I'll explain. The British and the French are still not respecting American neutrality, so they're still kind of taking advantage of any sort of U.S. ships that are trying to trade with either country. So America's very upset with this. Jefferson wants to avoid war, so he persuaded Congress to pass the Embargo Act of 1807. This act bans all international trade, which sounds very backwards. Jefferson's hope in doing this is that this will economically hurt France and England, and that they would basically agree to stop attacking ships and let them trade neutrally and not try to bother them. But unfortunately, England aren't really hurt by this. Instead, it hurts the United States. So this was completely pointless, and it actually did the opposite of what it was supposed to do, which is hurt us worse. So it would later be repealed during Madison's presidency. But it was Thomas Jefferson's go at trying to prevent these kinds of things from happening without having war. And we will see that war break with James Madison. Okay, that will be the last president. I'm going to talk about James Madison, but I'm going to do it in a second link. So be sure to click the second link, okay?